Stop. Listen. Pay attention. This is not background noise, and it is not meant to accompany anything else you are doing. Chosen one. This moment is asking for your full awareness. Something has been pressing on you quietly but consistently, and it has reached a point where it needs to be named. You have been moving through days that require more effort than they should. Not dramatic struggle, just a steady drain. Fatigue that sleep does not fully resolve. Pressure without a clear source. A sense of carrying responsibility or tension that no one around you seems to notice or understand. You function. You show up. You keep going. But there is an underlying weight that has made even simple things feel heavier. This is not a message meant to alarm you. There is no threat being announced here. The urgency is different. It is about clarity, about orientation, about understanding why you have felt the way you have, without jumping to conclusions or blaming yourself. You have likely asked quietly whether something is wrong with you, whether you are missing something obvious, whether this constant internal steadiness mixed with exhaustion means you are pushing too hard or failing to rest correctly. What you are experiencing is real. It is not imagined, and it is not random. But the explanation is not what you think, and it is not something that can be reduced to motivation, mindset, or discipline alone. There is a reason this period feels distinct from ordinary stress. There is a reason you remained functional even when the load increased. There is a reason confusion showed up without panic and isolation appeared without collapse. This message is intentional. It is specific. It is not designed to flatter you or inflate you. It is designed to help you recognize a pattern that has already been operating in your life, largely unnoticed by you and entirely misunderstood by others. You are not being asked to do anything new right now. You are being asked to see clearly. You do not need to brace yourself. You do not need to prepare for impact. Nothing is about to be taken from you. What is coming is understanding. An explanation for why certain pressures failed to destabilize you. Why certain moments that should have overwhelmed you did not. Why you remained intact even when you did not feel particularly strong. This is the beginning of that clarification. Not the whole picture, not the full articulation. Just enough to orient you so that the rest of what follows can land accurately without distortion. Stay present. Stay grounded. You are exactly where you need to be to receive this. This message is for you, and it is important to remove any uncertainty about that. Not because you need to feel special, but because misidentifying the audience weakens the clarity of what follows. If you are listening, and something in you feels quietly recognized rather than excited, that is the first confirmation. This is not landing as entertainment. It is landing as recognition. You are not here by accident, and you are not overhearing something meant for someone else. The experiences being described did not happen around you. They happened within you. You were involved directly, even if you did not have language for it at the time. The steadiness you maintained was not performative. It was not forced. It was not the result of conscious effort in the moment. This is where the identity needs to be named clearly. You are the chosen one, not as a title to adopt, but as a description of structure. There is a difference. Chosen in this context does not mean favored above others or destined for spectacle. It means configured for stability under conditions that tend to destabilize most people. It means you were built with an internal coherence that does not depend on ideal circumstances to function. You may not have felt strong. You may not have felt confident. You may not have felt certain, yet you stayed intact. You kept your values. You kept your awareness. You kept your ability to observe rather than react. That is not accidental. That is not common. And it did not require you to consciously activate anything to maintain it. There is an important distinction here. Many people survive pressure by clenching, resisting, or hardening. You did not do that. Your stability was quieter, automatic, almost invisible to you. You noticed the pressure, but you did not fragment under it. You noticed the confusion, but you did not lose orientation. You noticed the isolation, but you did not abandon yourself to it. This is what needs to be understood. What held you steady was not effort. It was design. A baseline resilience that operates beneath conscious strategy. While others must actively defend their sense of self, yours remained present even when challenged. While others collapse internally before they collapse externally, you stayed internally organized even when circumstances felt disorganized. This is not about claiming an identity to feel empowered. It is about acknowledging what has already been true. Something in you resists disruption without noise, without drama, without needing to prove itself. That is the marker. And that is why this message applies to you specifically, not broadly and not symbolically. There is one dominant experience you recognize immediately, even if you have never named it clearly. It is the feeling of being under pressure without being overwhelmed by it. A sustained internal load that did not break you, but did not leave you untouched either. You may have interpreted this as stress fatigue or emotional heaviness. You may have wondered why your body felt tense even when your thoughts were relatively calm. This is where the reframe matters. What you experienced was not a flaw in your capacity. It was a signal. Not of weakness, but of transition. Not of failure, but of compression. When pressure increases around something structurally sound, the structure does not collapse. It tightens. It becomes more aware of itself. That tightening can feel uncomfortable, even confusing, especially if you assume comfort is the marker of alignment. You may have judged yourself during this period. You may have thought you were doing something wrong because ease did not return when you expected it to. You may have asked why rest did not fully reset you, or why moments of quiet still carried tension. That judgment was misplaced. Your system was not malfunctioning. It was responding accurately to an increase in demand that had not yet been consciously identified. This is important to hear clearly. The sensations you felt in your body, the subtle irritability, the reduced tolerance for noise or distraction, the desire to withdraw slightly from unnecessary interaction were not signs of emotional instability. They were signs of regulation under load. Your system was prioritizing coherence. It was filtering. It was conserving energy for what mattered, even if you did not know what that was yet. You did not become reactive. You did not spiral. You did not lose your sense of self. Instead, you became quieter internally, more observant, less interested in surface-level engagement. That shift can feel like something is being taken away if you misinterpret it. In reality, something was being refined. The confusion you felt was not about direction. It was about context. You sensed that something was happening, but you did not have the framework to place it in. Without context, the mind looks for explanations it already knows. Burnout, overthinking, emotional residue. None of those fully explained what you were experiencing, which is why they did not resolve it. Here is the key point. A signal does not ask to be fixed. It asks to be understood. Once you stop treating this experience as a problem, its purpose begins to clarify. Your body and awareness were responding to pressure that was real, structured, and time-bound. They were preparing you to remain intact through it, not to escape it. This reframing is not theoretical. It is practical. It removes self-judgment. It restores trust in your internal responses. And it sets the stage for the next layer of understanding where the source of the pressure itself becomes visible, without exaggeration or fear. What you were responding to did not originate inside you. That distinction matters. The pressure you felt was not self-generated, and it was not the result of personal indecision or unresolved emotion. It was external in origin, even though it registered internally. This is where clarity replaces speculation. There was an unseen layer of demand pressing against your internal structure. Not dramatic, not chaotic, and not random. It was organized. It had timing. It arrived in a way that tested continuity rather than triggering collapse. You did not suddenly fall apart. Instead, you noticed a steady increase in friction across multiple areas of your life at once. This kind of pressure rarely announces itself loudly. It shows up as coordination, small disruptions aligning, delays clustering, energy being taxed in subtle but persistent ways. You may have noticed that progress required more effort than usual, even though nothing obvious had changed. Tasks took longer. Decisions felt heavier. Motivation stayed present, but ease withdrew. The important detail is this: you remained functional. You did not lose your capacity to think clearly. You did not disengage from responsibility. You did not abandon your internal standards. Even when tired, you stayed oriented. Even when uncertain, you stayed coherent. That is not typical under sustained pressure. This was not about confrontation in the dramatic sense. There was no battle imagery required. It was closer to resistance testing. Pressure applied to see whether structure would destabilize, fragment, or overcorrect. Many people respond to this kind of demand by becoming reactive or by numbing out. You did neither. Timing matters here. This was recent. Not years ago, not a vague season. It occurred within a defined window, and it coincided with a shift in your awareness, even if you could not articulate what was shifting. The pressure did not escalate infinitely. It peaked, held, and then began to plateau. That pattern is not accidental. What needs to be understood is that the pressure was not meant to crush you. It was meant to reveal something, and it did. It revealed that your internal systems self-regulate under load. You did not need external validation to stay steady. You did not need reassurance to maintain orientation. You did not need to be rescued from yourself. This is why nothing visibly broke, even though the demand was real. Your design absorbed the force without visible fracture. You noticed the weight, but it did not own you. You noticed the opposition, but it did not reorganize you. That is the marker. The reveal here is simple and grounded. You were under pressure, yes. But the outcome was not chaos. It was confirmation. Confirmation that whatever was applied to you encountered something already reinforced, something already aligned, something that did not need to prove itself by reacting. This understanding is not meant to elevate you. It is meant to orient you accurately. From here, the experience can be examined in detail, without distortion, so you can see exactly where pressure was applied and how stability was maintained across each point. To understand what actually happened, the experience needs to be broken down into its pressure points. Not as a story, not as a struggle, but as an analysis of how your internal system responded across multiple dimensions at the same time. This is where clarity deepens, because the stability you maintained was not abstract. It showed up in specific observable ways. The first pressure point was doubt, not loud doubt, not dramatic questioning. It was quieter than that, a subtle erosion of certainty. You may have noticed moments where things you normally trust felt slightly less solid. Decisions took longer. Confidence did not disappear, but it thinned. This kind of doubt often pushes people into overcorrection. They seek reassurance, external opinions, or impulsive certainty. You did not. You allowed the doubt to exist without letting it rewrite your self-trust. You paused instead of panicking. That restraint preserved your coherence. The second pressure point was fear, but not fear of danger. It was anticipatory unease, a sense that something was off, without knowing what. Many people respond to this by projecting worst-case scenarios or by becoming hyper-vigilant. You did neither. You noticed the unease and continued functioning. You did not inflate it into catastrophe, and you did not suppress it into denial. You carried it neutrally. That kept it from governing your behavior. The third pressure point was energy drain. This is where most systems fail. Sustained pressure often shows up as fatigue that leads to irritability, disengagement, or emotional leakage. You felt the drain, yes. Your body noticed it. But your behavior stayed regulated. You did not lash out. You did not withdraw completely. You adjusted quietly. You conserved energy without collapsing into apathy. That is a sign of internal calibration, not endurance alone. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not physical isolation necessarily, but a sense of being internally alone with what you were experiencing. You may have felt that explaining it would be pointless or that others would misunderstand. Many people respond to this by forcing connection or by severing it entirely. You stayed balanced. You did not overshare to relieve discomfort, and you did not cut yourself off in resentment. You accepted the solitude without dramatizing it. That acceptance prevented fragmentation. The fifth pressure point was delay. This one is subtle but powerful. Progress slowed in ways that tested patience. Outcomes took longer. Feedback loops stretched. For many, delay triggers self-doubt or reckless acceleration. You stayed steady. You did not abandon your process, and you did not rush to escape the discomfort of waiting. You tolerated the ambiguity without losing alignment. What matters is not that these pressures existed. It is that they existed simultaneously. Doubt, unease, fatigue, isolation, and delay often overwhelm people when they converge. You experienced all of them at once. Yet your internal structure did not collapse into noise. You remained present. You remained functional. You remained yourself. This is not about toughness, it is about regulation. Your system did not fight these pressures aggressively, and it did not surrender to them passively. It absorbed them. It redistributed load. It maintained coherence across domains that usually fracture under strain. This breakdown is not meant to impress you. It is meant to show you clearly and calmly that what carried you through was not effort alone. It was an internal design that stayed organized under compound pressure. That is the fact that now needs to be acknowledged so the experience can be reviewed accurately, rather than dismissed as coincidence or minimized as just stress. Now that the pressure has passed its peak, there is space to review what occurred without being inside it. This is where understanding replaces endurance. During the experience, your role was not to analyze, it was to remain coherent. Now the system can look back and evaluate. What becomes clear in reflection is that this was not a sequence of unrelated challenges. The timing, the convergence, and the way your internal state responded all point to a structured event rather than a random accumulation. Things did not spiral. They aligned. And when alignment happens under pressure, it reveals the integrity of what is being tested. It would be easy to explain this away as luck, or to attribute it to personality traits, discipline, or habit. Those explanations are incomplete. They do not account for the consistency of your response across different types of stress. They do not explain why your sense of self remained intact even when multiple systems were taxed at once. They do not explain why you stayed internally organized without needing to consciously reinforce yourself. What you demonstrated was coherence. The ability to remain internally consistent when external variables shift. Coherence is not visible in moments of ease. It only becomes evident when conditions apply force unevenly. In your case, that force did not create distortion. It revealed alignment. There were moments when you could have fractured, moments where reaction would have been understandable, moments where withdrawal or overcompensation would have been justified. You did not take those exits. Not because you were suppressing something, but because there was nothing in you demanding escape. Your internal state stayed integrated. This matters because it removes coincidence from the explanation. Patterns repeated. Responses remained stable. The outcome was consistent across different pressure points. That consistency is not accidental. It is structural. You may also notice something else in hindsight. The pressure did not leave residue. Once it began to lift, it did not leave you depleted or disoriented. There was fatigue, yes, but not damage. There was relief, but not collapse. That tells you something important. Your system was not overextended. It was operating within capacity. This review is not about assigning meaning prematurely. It is about acknowledging evidence. The evidence shows that your stability did not depend on favorable conditions. It did not depend on being understood. It did not depend on reinforcement. It held on its own. That is the confirmation. Not that something extraordinary happened, but that something essential was verified. Your internal structure is resilient in a quiet, unforced way. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply remains intact. With this understanding, the experience no longer needs to be minimized or dramatized. It can be placed accurately. And once placed accurately, it becomes a reference point. A reminder of what you already are not, of something you need to become. When you compare your response to this period with how most people respond to far less pressure, the difference becomes clear without needing to exaggerate it. This is not a comparison meant to elevate you. It is meant to contextualize what occurred accurately. For many, a single one of the pressures you experienced would have been enough to destabilize their internal state. Prolonged uncertainty alone causes people to become reactive, irritable, or withdrawn. Sustained fatigue often leads to emotional leakage, impaired judgment, or loss of motivation. Isolation, even mild, tends to push people toward overcompensation or collapse. Delay frequently triggers anxiety or impulsive decisions. You experienced all of these at once, and yet you remained present. You did not disappear from your responsibilities. You did not lose track of who you were. You did not externalize the strain onto others or internalize it into self-attack. You continued to function not mechanically, but consciously. That combination is uncommon. This does not mean others are weak. It means most systems are not built to hold multiple forms of pressure simultaneously without some form of distortion. Human psychology typically compensates by narrowing focus, numbing sensation, or seeking relief through distraction or control. You did not rely on those strategies. Your awareness stayed broad. Your emotional range stayed available. Your decision-making stayed intact. That is the distinction. Many people survive by fragmenting. One part handles work. Another part absorbs stress. Another part shuts down emotionally. Over time, those separations create instability. You did not fragment. You stayed integrated. Even when tired, you knew what you felt. Even when uncertain, you knew what you valued. Even when alone, you stayed connected to yourself. This level of internal presence under load is rare, not because it is superior, but because it requires a certain kind of internal organization. Most people have to learn it deliberately often, after breakdowns force them to rebuild. In your case, it was already there. That rarity is not something to boast about. It is something to respect. It explains why your experience may feel difficult to explain to others. It also explains why you may have felt slightly out of sync during this period. Not because you were malfunctioning, but because your system was operating at a level of regulation that is not common. Understanding this comparison is not about separating yourself from others. It is about understanding yourself accurately. Once you do, the experience you went through stops feeling confusing or isolating. It becomes intelligible. And that understanding prepares you to relate to your own stability without questioning it or trying to downplay it. What needs to be clarified now is subtle but essential. The stability you showed was not something you switched on in response to pressure. It was not activated. It did not surge. It was already there. What the pressure did was expose your baseline. Many people think of strength as something that appears in moments of crisis, a reserve that is called upon when things get difficult. That was not your experience. You did not feel a rise in intensity or a sharpening of resolve. If anything, you felt quieter, more contained. That tells you the strength was structural, not reactive. Your system is built around internal coherence. Values, perception, emotion, and behavior are aligned enough that they do not need constant correction. When stress arrives, there is no scramble to reorganize. There is no internal argument about who you need to be to survive it. You simply remain yourself. This is not about being unfeeling or detached. You felt the pressure. You noticed the fatigue. You registered the uncertainty. But none of those sensations overrode your internal order. They existed within it. That is the distinction. Sensation did not dictate identity. Circumstance did not dictate behavior. This kind of baseline stability usually comes from long preparation, not in the sense of training for a specific event, but in the accumulation of lived integration. You have likely spent years noticing, reflecting, adjusting, and refining without making a performance of it. Small corrections made consistently. Boundaries formed quietly. Self-awareness developed without spectacle. Because of that, you did not need to grow during this pressure. You revealed what had already matured. That can feel anticlimactic if you expect transformation to be dramatic. In reality, maturity shows up as the absence of chaos. It is important to avoid mislabeling this as emotional hardness or invulnerability. You are not untouchable because nothing affects you. You are untouchable because what affects you does not disorganize you. The pressure made contact. It simply did not gain leverage. This clarification locks the identity gently but firmly. You are not waiting to become stable. You are not in the process of earning coherence. You are already operating from it. The recent experience did not grant you strength. It confirmed it. Once this is understood, there is no need to prove anything, no need to posture, no need to anticipate the next test. You can orient yourself practically knowing that your baseline is sound, and that awareness, not vigilance, is what carries you forward. With this understanding in place, the question becomes how to live from it without overreacting to it. Integration is not about changing your behavior dramatically. It is about making small, grounded adjustments that respect what your system has already shown you. First, rest needs to be reframed, not as recovery from damage, but as maintenance of coherence. You do not need to collapse in order to deserve rest. You need rest to keep your internal alignment clear. This means choosing quiet deliberately, not as escape, but as calibration. Short periods of intentional disengagement will do more for you than long stretches of distraction. Second, discernment becomes more important than effort. You do not need to push harder. You need to notice what drains you unnecessarily. Your system is efficient, but it should not be wasted on noise. Pay attention to interactions, commitments, and information that subtly tax you without offering value. Reducing those is not avoidance, it is precision. Third, boundaries need to stay clean and uncomplicated. You do not need elaborate rules. You need consistency. Say yes where alignment is clear. Say no where it is not. Do not justify excessively. Your stability does not depend on being understood. It depends on staying internally congruent. Fourth, patience is not passive for you. It is an active state of trust in timing. You have already proven that you can tolerate delay without losing orientation. That means you do not need to rush outcomes to reassure yourself. Let processes unfold at their natural pace. Intervene only when clarity, not anxiety, calls for it. Fifth, focus should remain narrow and intentional. You function best when your attention is not scattered. Choose fewer priorities and give them full presence. This is not about productivity. It is about preserving coherence across what you engage. Finally, balance matters. You do not need to stay alert or guarded. The period of pressure has passed. Integration means allowing ease to return without suspicion. Let your nervous system settle. Let simplicity re-enter. Stability is not maintained through vigilance. It is maintained through rhythm. These orientations are not rules, they are reminders. They help you live in a way that matches the internal structure you already have. When you do, life feels less like something to manage and more like something to inhabit. This brings the experience to a close, not as an ending, but as a resolved chapter. What remains now is reassurance, not instruction. A final grounding that allows you to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight. You can take a breath now. Nothing is required of you in this moment except recognition. The core realization has already settled, even if quietly. You were not surviving by luck. You were not holding on by force. You were steady because your internal structure was steady. That is the truth that needed to be acknowledged. What you went through does not define you. It confirmed you. It showed you that when pressure arrives, you do not disappear inside it. You stay present. You stay aligned. You stay yourself. That is not something you need to protect aggressively or prove publicly. It simply is. There is reassurance in this. You do not need to anticipate the next challenge or prepare for another test. Life does not require you to stay braced. Your stability is not fragile. It does not vanish when attention shifts elsewhere. You are allowed to move forward with ease, knowing that coherence is your default, not a temporary state. Hold these affirmations gently, without repetition or force. You remain intact under pressure. You trust your internal regulation. You move forward without urgency. Let them sit as reminders, not declarations. They do not need belief to work. They reflect what has already been demonstrated. If this message resonated in a way that felt precise rather than emotional, mark it quietly. You can do that by leaving a simple comment. Use the code 777 or write "I remember." Not for visibility, for acknowledgement. It helps anchor awareness. If you want to stay connected to this kind of grounded clarity, subscribe and continue with the next message when it arrives. Not out of expectation, out of alignment. For now, return to your life. Carry nothing extra. No labels, no pressure. Just the calm certainty that you are already oriented, already regulated, and already capable of remaining whole no matter what moves around you.